Hey, before I get started here, I'm willing to bet that some of you went out and bought a radiator and you don't know what these dowel pins are here. These are attached to a long black metal piece that runs through the top of your radiator. Give you these dowel pins because some of the newer model cars call for these. This way they can just sell the same radiator to a whole lot more people than just a limited audience of Chrysler buyers. If your old radiator does not have these, you have a couple options. You can just cut these off right there flush at the black piece and just leave that black piece on, or you can take the whole black piece off and just trash it. You don't really need it. If you just decide to trash it, you should put the screws or the bolts back into the screw holes, and this way they won't get filled up with water and sit for years and start rusting away. The first thing we have to do is remove that black shroud. It's actually kind of gray now, but underneath it is a blue, the same color as the car, a blue long cross member going from side to side. And that's going to have to come out too. This shroud is held down by 5 Phillips head screws, two 10mm bolts on both ends, and two of those plastic pop rivets on both ends. Now you can just cut those pop rivets off. They're not really doing much of anything. I don't even think they're necessary. But if you want to put them back on, because they're going to break if you just pull them out, they're real cheap at your local parts store. Now there's 4 bolts holding down this cross member. There's 2 on each end, and you can either use a 13mm or a 1/2 inch. Both will work. And just leave the cable and the hood latch and everything like that connected in place and just get it out of your way. You just want to lift it up and kind of flip it over and set it aside. And now we need to remove the fans. There's 2 fans on this car. It's a double fan. Both are electric, so they're both running off 2 different wire connections. And these connections can be a little bit tricky. There's a good chance if you're not dealing with exactly the same car that your connector is going to be a little bit different. In mine, there's this little red slider thing that you have to push out, and then you have to press down on to release the wire. They should release real easy, so don't go tugging on these real hard. And then don't force any clips or pieces of plastic because they will break. Other than wires, you have to disconnect 2 bolts, one on each end, and they're 10mm bolts, and they're at the top. Outside of that, the fan kind of sits on a hanger that's connected to the radiator. Then you're going to have to detach the upper radiator hose just to give yourself more room to get those fans out of there. I'll be reconnecting this hose in a minute because I'm going to be starting the car back up when I take these fans out, just so I can decipher where the leak is coming from, because leaks can be tricky. They can start in one place and wind up in another place. Sometimes they're obvious and it's a busted hose or something like that. But in this case, it's not obvious. I cannot see where the leak is originating. All I know is that it's leaking. So, in order to eyeball it, because I don't have a pressure gauge or anything like that, I have to take all this stuff off and find out if, in fact, this radiator has a hole. And in the meantime, I don't want that antifreeze spilling out in the ground or anywhere else because it's toxic to animals, especially dogs and cats, and they like to drink it and they wind up getting really sick. For now, I'm just going to plug it and then I'm going to reconnect it and start the car back up so I can find out where this leak is originating. I think now that we know for sure that this radiator is bad, it's cracked at the seam, you should realize that there's a radiator and a condenser. This is the condenser, this is the radiator, and they're attached to each other. But it's real easy to get these two things disconnected, which we absolutely have to do because everything's attached to that condenser, and it's not just going to come out with the radiator. So we have to leave the condenser in the car and disconnect both of them and pull the radiator out. But before you get to all that, now's a good time to drain the antifreeze out of the radiator, and the drain plug is on the driver's side at the bottom back of the radiator. And this is the bracket on the condenser, and coming through that bracket from the radiator is a clip that has to be squeezed together top and bottom in order to allow you to disconnect the condenser from the radiator. And on the other side, just a little bit further down, we see the same situation. It's a clip that has to be squeezed together in order to dislodge that condenser. At the bottom of the condenser, we have just two hangers, so you should be able to technically pull that condenser up a little bit and dislodge it from the radiator. The problem is these cheap plastic, I don't know what you would call them, these go from all the way to the top of the radiator all the way down to the bottom, and they can be bent to allow those condenser lines to be manipulated out of the way. This can be a pain. It's not as easy as it looks or sounds, but if you feel something binding up when you're trying to remove that condenser, it's no doubt this cheap plastic gasket type thing. So once you get the condenser dislodged and just kind of laying in the car for a second, you need to disconnect the bottom radiator hose and disconnect the top radiator hose. And technically, your radiator should just pull right out of there. Again, if you feel something binding up, it's that cheap plastic kind of gasket thing. You need to kind of manipulate that out of the way because the lines from the condenser get in its way, so it takes a little maneuvering, but I'm sure you can figure it out. And this is important to know. Your radiator's liable to come with things that you don't need, and there's going to be things that don't come with it and you do need, so you're going to have to take off your old radiator and put on your new radiator. There's two clips on the side of your old radiator that act as bolts to screw in the fan. Your new radiator will not have those clips, so you're going to have to take them off your old radiator. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. But first I'm going to set it into the car, and then I'll show you how to take those clips off and put them on the new radiator. Those plastic gasket type cheap things that the lines manipulate around, they have to be taken off your old radiator and clipped onto the new one. And you'll see clearly how they clip right on there. You just got to press them down a little bit hard and you'll hear them pop in place. Now, your new radiator should come with two rubber seats at the bottom of it where the radiator lays down into the molded foundation of the car. And this absorbs the shock every time you hit a bump. So if you put the new radiator in without those rubber seats, it's eventually going to crack. So just make sure they're in there, and you'll see where it sits straight down in there. Just make sure they're in there, otherwise you're just asking for problems. And if they don't come with your new radiator, you're going to have to take the old ones off your old radiator and put them on the new radiator. And this one came with it, so I mean, some parts it comes with and some parts it comes without. The radiator's seated, so now I just have to pull up that condenser and kind of hang it on the hangers that are on the new radiator, and then kind of clip it into place. And you're going to find out that all of that is easier said than done. It's going to take a little manipulation, and once again, those cheap plastic gasket looking things are going to be getting in your way and making things difficult for you. Just do the best you can and keep your patience, and I'm sure you can figure it out. Once your condenser is reconnected with the seated radiator, now it's time to take these clips off that I was referring to earlier. And so before you put the fans on, you have to put these clips on. Otherwise, there will be nothing to bolt the fans to the radiator. Yeah, I don't know why. I mean, these things are like really cheap. They're clips and they act like nuts to have something for the bolts to screw into. And your new radiator doesn't come with it. If yours does, I'd be very surprised. This is a $160 radiator that, and they skimped on like 5-cent pieces of metal. Now you should reconnect the bottom hose while you have the room down there without the fan. Once the fan is reinstalled, then you can connect the top hose, and that way you'll have more room to connect the fan. At this point, I still hadn't taken off that top piece on that radiator, but now's the time. I mean, you can't go much further until you take this off because it'll get in the way of everything. And that's just 4 screws holding that down, so just take them off and it pulls right up. That's out of your hair. And now we reinstall the top radiator hose. And now we install the cross member. This is just 4 bolts, bolts right in, lines right up, no problem. And this was a cold day, so a neighbor saw me out here working and decided to come over and give me a pair of gloves to use. Take care of your neighbors and they'll take care of you. That's my motto. These shrouds can be a little bit tricky to maneuver around the hood latch, but just keep your patience again and just kind of think about it while you're doing it. And you shouldn't have too much of a problem with it. It's going to take a little bit of wrestling, but you can handle it. And now it's time to tighten that shroud down, and don't forget to reconnect the fan wires too. Now you want to fill it back up with fresh antifreeze and then burp the system and turn the car on and let it heat up all the way, and then turn your heater on. And that should send the cooling level a little bit lower because it has to run through your heater cooling. And continue to let it warm up until it's all the way warmed up, and then go ahead and top it off. And that's just about it. Scooby, fill back up, check for leaks, make sure nothing's rattling around and everything is tight, and you're about done. Shop cost for this job is $600 to $700. If they charge you more than $700, it's steep. If they charge you more than $800, you're getting ripped off. If it's below $600, you're getting a good price. Your cost if you do it yourself is right at about $200.